Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for the slight delay. We had a double booking actually, but we managed to sort it out. My apologies for that. So good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to the webinar on Fabric security. That will be presented by Sequoise and myself. I'm Christian, working for Sequoise for 2 years now, and as a cloud solution and security architect, and in the context of our webinar today as a data and AI security product owner. And I invite my colleague Christophe to present himself and start the presentation.
Cool, perfect. So hi everyone, I'm Christophe Zimlar. I've been working at Arixus for around 3.5 years right now, and I'm currently leading the data and AI team, where we cover everything from data architecture, data engineering, data visualization, to implementation of AI use cases. And we're focused on Microsoft technology, so think about tools like Azure OpenAI, Microsoft 365 Copilot, etc. And of course, Microsoft Fabric and Power BI as well, which will be the topic of this session here. So let me go to the, yeah, Christian, you want to say something extra in terms of introduction, or we're ready to go ahead?
I think we're good to go. Huh?
Okay, perfect, cool. Turns out there was even a slide about this, so I think we already covered this, right? So let's carry on to the logistics. So the idea is to have a presentation of less than 1 hour. We want to leave some time for Q&A. So normally you should be able to post all your questions here in the Teams meeting, and at the end of the session after the presentation, we'll take a look at these questions as well. The session will be recorded, and you will get a follow-up email in which we share you the link of the recorded session. Cool. So what is the goal? So Christian and I, we have 2 simple goals for this session, right? And that is for you to gain a better understanding of Fabric SaaS security. So we will do this by explaining Fabric and its security at a conceptual level. And we'll give a little brief demo on how this can look like in practice. And also, we want you to gain insights in how you can assess Fabric security, right? And with a zero trust mindset, that is. So we will explain how we use the Microsoft benchmark tuned for Fabric by Sequoise to assess the security in Fabric. Cool. So Microsoft Fabric and why is security needed, right? Before we dive into the security aspects, let's first take a look at Microsoft Fabric and data platforms in a broader sense. So let's kick off with some very common frustrations and issues within data and analytics that a lot of organizations and customers of ours as well are facing, right? So in a lot of organizations, there's a lot of siloed data, siloed one-off reports and analysis happening. There is a lot of time spent manually preparing data for reports, and all of this is causing issues, right? There is lack of unified, trusted, up-to-date reporting. So a business user wants to use a report to support their decision-making, right? They want to have up-to-date reports in order to do that. But these one-off reports, etc., they are not great, and they oftentimes lead to issues. Another issue in that case is that there's a lot of people creating these reports in different tools, and there's no streamlined user experience over all the reports as well, right? Another issue is that there is inconsistent metrics across teams. So the marketing department, the sales department, they're all building their own reports. They have their own data sets. And to give it an example, sometimes they're talking about customers, while actually they're having 2 different definitions of customers, right? That in itself is not an issue, but it is an issue when those people are talking with each other and they think they have the same definition. And also another thing that we see is that there is limited self-service capabilities, right? So oftentimes there's a heavy reliance on IT or a centralized data team to create reports, and people don't have a lot of self-service capabilities, which increases the time to insights, and with that also the time to value. But luckily, there's a modern data platform, which can be a solution for a lot of these things, right? So I want you to think of the data platform as a complete solution for ingesting data, processing, analyzing the data, but also to visualize and report on that data in order to take actions, right? So the goal of a report should always be to take action or support decision making, because otherwise, if you just build a nice fancy report, that's not it's not being used to take action or to influence a decision. What's the actual value that you create, right? So the idea is very high level. You have different data sources. So for example, you have your Dynamics ERP, you have ServiceNow, you have other data sources. All of this data is being ingested into your unified data layer, I would say. And here we can transform the data, correlate all the different data sets together, et cetera, so that we can do analysis of it, of the data, and build reports on top of it. Again, leading to action. So a data platform is something that can enable that, right? The idea is that we can unify the data analytics ecosystem. We can automate a lot of those data preparation things, and having everything in that unified data layer will enforce or at least increase the consistency and also increase the reuse of those data assets. And along the road, depending on the maturity of the organization, you can empower users as well with self-service capabilities. Cool, but Microsoft Fabric, what is it? Well, basically, it's the latest and greatest from Microsoft in terms of data platforms, right? So it's a unified software as a service data platform, meaning you don't have to set up a lot of infrastructure. You don't have to spin up all these different Azure services, etc. All the tools are available inside of Microsoft Fabric, right? All the tools that you need for data ingestion with data pipelines, for example, data transformations you can do using the data engineering workload with notebooks, data visualization, you can use Power BI, which is now part of Microsoft Fabric. All of the data is stored in the unified OneLake data layer. So everything is contained within Microsoft Fabric. Being a Microsoft product, it also has seamless integration with other Microsoft products as well. So for example, if you're using Dynamics 365 for your ERP or CRM or whatever, there's pretty much an out-of-the-box integration available there. Having said that, it doesn't mean that if your data sources are not Microsoft, of course, you can still ingest all of the data in Microsoft Fabric as well. It's data governance and compliance ready, so it has built-in integration with Microsoft Purview, and there's a lot of stuff ready to go, ready for your configuration, and well, it's very scalable. So you have capacities, you can scale up, can scale down, and grow with the rising needs or growing needs of your organization, right? And all of that at a predictable cost. So if you're making a mistake in a data factory pipeline where you implement an infinite loop, for example, you will not incur the costs. You will only pay for the capacity that you buy. Cool. That being said, very slight high-level introduction to Microsoft Fabric. Then I give the word to Christian to talk a little bit more about the security aspect of it.
Microsoft is offering you basically a SaaS turnkey solution to build a data platform, to deploy a data platform as a service in a few minutes, actually. But why is security needed in Fabric when Microsoft offers you basically a turnkey solution and a SaaS solution, they secure it? So, well, first of all, because you have the shared responsibility model, where in on-prem you're responsible to the full stack security, all layers of security, in IaaS, in PaaS, in SaaS, you still have a part of responsibility that you need to take care of, and that means that mostly your access to the data, your configuration of Fabric remains essential to secure the platform. So in a nutshell, Microsoft takes care of the security of the cloud, but you as a customer must take care of the security in the cloud. Another reason is that, of course, in Fabric, like any modern data platform, you're trying to address some solid or critical business cases, and these typically include information that in the modern day and world, you absolutely do not want to be exposed to the external world, like PII or financial data. And of course, that makes your Fabric a super attractive target for attackers. And well, like all attackers, they use the principle of least effort, which means that they know or assume that Microsoft Secure Foundation is fairly robust. So they will look for vulnerabilities or misconfigurations or inadequate security controls in the part of the shared security model that is the responsibility of the customer. And so that's why you need to actively manage Fabric security, even though Microsoft offers you, as we'll see later on in the session, many built-in security and controls. As we all know, also today, the world is more and more regulated, and we had a few years ago GDPR that protects personal information, and today and well, since last year, NIS2 is becoming applicable, and the NIS2 directive requires organization to implement a lot of security measures, access control, incident detection, encryption of data, and MFA, and monitoring. So Fabric must be configured using the configuration that Microsoft offers you to meet these regulatory obligations. A last but important aspect of why security is needed in Fabric, even though Microsoft secured the platform or most of the platform for you, is that the number of users of the platform increases dramatically to access this critical data. So it used to be that reports were prepared and shared securely. Today, most of the employees in your organization can access the data, but of course the data is sliced and diced so that they only access what they need to access. But if that would be attacked, and the attackers can actually break the filters and the slice and dice, well, basically through each user or each device of a user, you have a possible attack entry point. So that means that, yes, if you have a single compromised simple user account and you can find a security misconfiguration in Fabric, you can cause significant disruptions and data loss. So basically, adhering to zero trust principle is essential to ensure Fabric security. And as a summary for why you need to secure Fabric is that Microsoft secure the service, but you need to secure how you use the service. And it's a shared effort between all the teams in your company. So let's now look at what makes SaaS security different versus classic data platforms. I'll briefly skim over this section, so most of these points in this section should be known already. I'll try to highlight the points where the difference may not be so obvious. So let's start with, like, you have this huge deployment of hub and spoke setup in Azure. And if we zoom in on the landing zone for Synapse deployment, Synapse being the data platform precursor of Fabric, you can see that you already have a lot of components. Of course, the goal is to not look at each of these components in detail, but just knowing that you have each of these components needs to be provisioned individually by you. Some of those components are functional components, some of the components are security components that you need to provision, monitor, control, etc. So this is already a major effort, just from a functional and engineering effort. But what about securing this platform? In a classic security model, you typically work with IaaS or PaaS. IaaS VMs running in a cluster to ensure high availability. You need to ensure clustering of these yourself. Each of these VMs, they run on an OS, they run applications. These applications are subject to vulnerabilities. You need to ensure that the OS and the applications, the components running on these VMs, are properly patched and that you monitor vulnerabilities. Also, on top of performance monitoring, you also need to have security monitoring, possibly integration with a SIEM like Sentinel to be able to detect incidents taking place on these devices. From a network perspective, you need to ensure a proper segregation, privatization of critical resources, so they are not accessible from the public internet or from different parts of your own networks. So you need to configure firewall, you need to configure network security groups, and possibly for PaaS service, you need to configure private endpoints using a private link service. What about this in Fabric? Well, in Fabric, this is just a, I would say, canonical deployment diagram of Fabric components. But here you can see actually that these components are pretty much functional components, and they don't make a reference to physical or even PaaS services. They're really the workloads that you can use in Fabric. And these are fully managed by Microsoft, so you don't see the infrastructure. So that means you don't need to patch it, you don't need to monitor the vulnerabilities on these infrastructure. These are all managed for you by Microsoft. One important point, though, I mentioned that I will highlight the points where there is difference, is the integration infrastructure. So that means that, of course, as Christophe pointed out, you cannot use Fabric without ingesting data and extracting this data into reports, into APIs that are used by applications, which means that you need to have some resources or services from Azure or even on-prem servers where you have your source data, and that needs to be integrated within Fabric. These, of course, still need to be secured in the old-fashioned way or in the manner that Fabric offers to you. So I call these kind of integration infrastructure edge integration compute services. Network security is everything that happens within Fabric is on the Microsoft backbone, and actually is not visible to us. So you don't need to segregate this network. You don't need to privatize it. This is all done for you as you trust the SaaS Fabric service. The interesting point is that of course, the Fabric console and user interface are publicly accessible by default. It is possible to configure these so that only users in your company can get access to this Fabric interface, either through a private link or conditional access. And also to integrate with edge devices. Fabric offers the notion of data gateways to ensure secure data transfers. There are two, I won't go into the details at this level, but just know that there are two types of data gateways, on-premises data gateways and managed VNet data gateways. But I think Christophe will explain this a bit later on in the presentation in his demo. What about identity and access management? Of course, whether you use a SaaS or you use a classic model, your basic principle always remains the same. So you need to apply least privileges. You need to assign permissions via security groups rather than directly assigned to users. And for privileged access to critical resources, some sort of privileged identity management needs to be put in place so that access is time-bound and request bound with validation. But problems that you need to solve with the classic model is that you may have resources that cross multiple tenants. You may have different authentication than Entra ID, for instance, SQL authentication, and also the different tools and different products that you use each come with their own idiosyncrasies and way to configure access with different roles and permission within Azure, within Synapse, within SQL. Also, when you do automation, when you need to do service access through non-human accounts, you have different possibilities. Service accounts, there are still classic accounts that you may need to provision for on-prem workloads, for instance. Service principal, the classic model of Azure, which typically works with the client ID, client secret, and that once somebody grabs it, can reuse as wanted. And a better solution is to use user or system managed identities, but these may or may not be available depending on the service that you use. So how does it work then for Fabric? Well, in Fabric, Entra ID is the unified, unique identity provider. For instance, that means that there are no longer SQL authentication on SQL Server. Azure SQL is always working with Entra ID authentication. An important point also in Fabric is that there is what so-called layered security evaluation model, which means that you have 3 layers of security checks. The first one is entry through your account on Entra ID gives you a role. Then you have the service level, depending on the service that you want to access, and then data security. And I think also Christophe will demonstrate a little bit what that means by role level security, etc. So these 3 layers combined, but they're all unified. In relationship to what I said earlier about the different roles within different products. Here, of course, there can still be differences, but the model is very harmonious and tries to be consistent across the board. An important concept within Fabric is the notion of workspace. So anything you do within Fabric is done within a workspace, and by definition, a workspace is the key security boundary for Fabric. And in that security boundary, you have workspace roles, typically admin, contributor, and reader, but you could potentially create custom roles as well. And a very important aspect as well is that when you have service access, so when Fabric needs to access resources, for instance, within Azure, you can and probably should use a workspace identity, which is kind of a system managed identity that you can create just by a click of a button as an admin within Fabric workspace. So this is all very simplified versus I would say the classic model. What about data protection? So if you want to work with data protection, typically you have to address these concerns from security, your confidentiality, for instance, through encryption, which means that you need to configure the different products, for instance, transparent data encryption for SQL, customer managed keys, so that your encryption is done on your terms with your key rather than the ones from Microsoft. Once again, if you need to attain some compliance level. Availability, you need to take care of your backups, at least technical backups yourself. And you need also to configure agents, for instance, on the VMs, and these agents need to talk to SIEM so that you can raise incidents. What about Fabric? In Fabric, encryption is across the board on by default, of course, working with Microsoft keys. The availability is also guaranteed to 3 nines, I think, well, 5 nines by Microsoft through the service SLA, which means that you do not need to take what I call technical backups that are needed for functionality, for instance, to be recovering when you have a data inconsistency, not due to a technical issue, but to a functional problem. This, of course, you still need to take care of. And that's important distinction as well, that you get offered a set of functionality by Fabric, but you still need to take care of your functional scenarios, of course. That's still your responsibility. Monitoring, there is no direct integration with a SIEM like Sentinel or a Defender for monitoring of vulnerabilities or incidents, but you may need to extract some logs, for instance, the audit logs, and integrate these with your platform, your SIEM of choice. From a data governance perspective, Fabric integrates with Purview. In full disclosure, we're not going to talk a lot about Purview. There was a session from Sequoise a while ago about Purview, and I promise you that there will be additional sessions in the future. It's a polite way of saying that I have a colleague that's expert on this topic, and I am not. So, as a summary, if I can, misclicked, my apologies. I think I just did something strange. Okay, good. I'm back on track. As a summary, you basically hand over control of your security to Microsoft as a software as a service fabric. Which means you don't need to worry about a lot of infrastructure aspects of security, but it's still a shared security model, but your focus will shift more towards identity and access management, the configuration of the platform, and the integration with your data sources, inbound or outbound. And of course, you need to protect your customer data and make sure that all the layers of security are handled correctly. So how can you make sure that you handle this securely? That's where we introduce what we did as Sequoise and Arsus, Christophe and I working together. For this, you need to give a comprehensive but holistic view at your Fabric deployment, and if possible, using a structured methodology so that you can make this assessment not with a single perspective, but from all perspectives of security. And at Sequoise, we chose to use the MCSB, the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, for this. So what is the MCSB? Basically, MCSB is something that Microsoft created to have a set of best practices, but the very important point is that they apply to multi-cloud. So it was created by Microsoft, but it does not only target Azure. And that's a very important point, and it is also why Sequoise chose to use it for cloud security assessment, not only for Azure, but for instance also for Amazon Web Services. I'm not going to go in details of these slides for the sake of winning a little bit of time, but basically that's what I was mentioning, is that MCSB also targets non-Microsoft clouds, currently AWS and Google Cloud, and also very important, it allows you to evaluate and assess your security, but it also most of the time, depending on the product, it may be a high level or it can be very detailed level of best practices. So what mitigation, what recommendations are needed to address the concerns, the vulnerabilities that you have identified. Important as well is that, and we use that a few times in our assignments working with customers, it's that some customers are required by compliance standards to map to use a specific security industry standard, like for instance CIS V8, and MCSB has mappings towards these well-known industry standards, which means that using one single industry benchmark like MCSB, you can map to other ones and optimize your assessments. Another aspect which is less important for us in the context of Fabric, because Fabric that is not true, but for clouds and also all clouds, not only Microsoft Azure, but there is integration with Defender for Cloud so that you can see possible misconfiguration, vulnerability, or compliance gaps directly structured and categorized in the categories of the MCSB. Right inside the Defender for Cloud Azure portal. Now, why did we choose to use MCSB for Fabric security? Indeed, a very important point. We used MCSB for Fabric security, but it is absolutely not a Microsoft-built framework. So there is no MCSB for Fabric. So it's something that Sequoise built together with Arsus, and we tailored it for Fabric context. Not all controls apply. So for instance, things like endpoint security, there is no notion of endpoint or servers in Fabric. So that does not apply, but the rest does. And why is it useful? Because the framework ensures that you don't forget anything. So if you would not use a framework, there would be a chance that you basically, in a classic image, you lock your doors with a very strong safe quality door, but you leave your window open, basically. Another interesting point of MCSB, it has a scoring, and the scoring is relative. So why is this useful? Because it can tell you, for instance, that you have a very good identity and access management domain security score, but that for your privileged access, and that actually is something that's typical in assessments, you may have a lower score. Privileged access is where, for instance, you would have a secret that is not stored in a key vault, like it never happens. One thing we wanted to do as well and keep from SCSB is that this would allow us to do assessments, but also to organize prescriptive guidance and best practices, also organized by the domains of MCSB. And also important is, as we do assessment for our customers, that allows us to calculate a score and review this score after the customer has taken action to address the identified issues, and so to track improvement as well. So concretely, what's in a cloud security assessment? I won't read this slide completely for you, but basically it's a structure evaluation where we use our own methodology, but as a foundation, we use MCSB. And our own methodology is pretty much this one, which is pretty classic. is that it is risk-based, and at the end of the day, you have an identification of the top security risks and a definition or the delivery of a security roadmap to address these top risks in a prioritized order. Yes, because like anything, security has a cost and also requires resources and effort. And you may not have all the resources and the money in the world to address all the problems from day one. So you address them step by step. Briefly, how we work with that. So it's typically an exercise that is taking 4 weeks elapsed time. And it's on top of using MCSB, we work with, and supported by MCSB, we work with interviews and we do actual checks in your environment, to which of course we are granted access. And we have our own internal tool to capture all of this input to better organize the generation of the reporting. So reporting, indeed, what you get the top risk matrix with proposed mitigations, the roadmap with prioritized recommendations, and of course, the supporting information. So this is pretty much top-down output, the MCSB findings and recommendation and the scores. Just as a little example, this is just one way of visualizing the scores. What's interesting in there is the different dimensions, domains of MCSB that are reviewed with Fabric typically. So for instance, indeed, you don't see endpoint security. I will now hand over to Christophe so that he can show you a little bit of this all in practice.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. So yes, let me walk you through a scenario, right? So imagine we're working at a company called Demotronics, who is a growing retail company, and they have sales transactions in an on-premise SQL server, right? The idea is that we ingest, transform, and enrich this raw data so that we can build a report on top of it and deliver business-ready insights, right? But of course, we want to do this in a secure way, right? So we want to respect the least privilege setup. We want to protect sensitive credentials like API keys in an Azure Key Vault. And also, yeah, we want to set up secure connectivity between our on-premises SQL Server and Fabric, right? So let me walk you through the high-level flow. So bear with me. So here on the left-hand side, we have our on-prem environment, which hosts our SQL Server on premises. We have our Azure environment, which hosts an Azure Key Vault. We have an external product enrichment API that we can use to pull in extra information about our products. And we have our Fabric environment as well. Bear with me, it's a demo setup, right? So the people that are using the Medallion architecture, for example, they will see like, oh, there's no gold layer. Well, this is just a simple setup to demonstrate some of these things, right? So the idea is that we will, using a Fabric data pipeline, we will pull in the data from our on-prem SQL server or using an on-prem data gateway to our lakehouse, to the bronze layer, right? That will host or store the as-is raw data from the SQL server. We'll pick this data up using a Fabric notebook and enrich it with data from that external API, right? An external API for which we need to go and get an API key from our Azure Key Vault. We'll transform the data, clean up the data, and land it in the silver layer, which we then use to build a Power BI report on top of, right? So what do we need to do? We need to lay the foundation, right? We need to create our Fabric workspace, need to ensure that everyone gets access so they can do their work. We need to set up that data pipeline and connect it to our on-prem SQL server so we can pull in the data to our Fabric environment. We need to create a notebook that we use to transform the data into our silver layer and also do those API calls to that API. So for there, we also need to get the secret from the Azure Key Vault. And then also we can build a report on top of that, which also has role level security. So for example, we can segregate the people that are in charge of online sales separately. So the workspace creation and the team onboarding, right? So we want to lay the foundation. So we need to create a Fabric workspace and we need to onboard the team, right? Instead of giving everyone independent direct access to the workspace itself, the idea is that we always create these security groups that we provision people into, right? So instead of managing access in Fabric directly, we actually set up these security groups and then we manage access to these security groups. Of course, these security groups need to be given RBAC roles within Microsoft Fabric. So indeed, as Christian earlier in the presentation already mentioned, there's an administrator role, there's a viewer role, and then there's also member or contributor role. So we assign the necessary security groups to those RBAC roles. So we just create a workspace, make sure that it's hooked up to our Fabric capacity. We create those security groups, put the people in those security groups, et voila. Important note, again, as touched upon by Christian as well earlier, there's more to it than this, right? So we need to ensure that MFA is enabled. We need to see if the use of conditional access policies is required or potentially private link, depending on the risk appetite and the situation of the customer, of course. So after we have set up that workspace and we laid out the foundation, we want to set up that Fabric data pipeline, right? We want to ingest the data from the on-prem SQL server to our Fabric environment in our OneLake data lake, in our lakehouse, right? In the bronze layer. So there we want to use the on-premises data gateway, and we want to create a connection to that SQL server using that on-premise data gateway. So as touched upon also by Christian earlier, there's also the VNet data gateway, and depending on the situation, you either go for the on-premises data gateway or you go for the VNet data gateway. In this case, as the data is being hosted on premises, we can just have a virtual machine or a server on-prem. We can install that on-premises data gateway software in there, and that will open up a private connection from that on-premises environment with our Fabric environment. So basically, that's the setup that you need to do on a machine over there. So we set up, it's basically just an application that you install on a virtual machine there. And once installed, configured, it will show up within your Fabric environment, right? So if, of course, that VM that hosts the on-premises data gateway has access to the SQL server, to the database that we want to connect to, that's also, of course, a prerequisite. If all of that is done, we can go ahead and create that connection within Microsoft Fabric, right? And it's a little bit small here, but when creating the connection, we can actually define what data gateway this connection should use. And so in this case, we are using this connection, this on-premises data gateway that we created. Once we've created that connection, we can actually use it within a data Fabric pipeline, right? So we can use a copy data job to hook up to the SQL server using that connection that we just defined using that on-premises data gateway. We can define what database and what table we want to ingest, and we can write it out to our lakehouse, which will be available for further consumption within the Fabric platform. So now that the data is in the bronze layer, in the bronze lakehouse, we actually want to pick up that data. We want to prepare, clean it up, and enrich it with some other data. So in the context of this little walkthrough, we will also be connecting to an API, which hosts more information about our products. So the idea here is that we connect to that private key vault, which is hosted in Azure using a workspace managed identity. We need to set up a private endpoint, et cetera, right? So if we take a look at this next slide here, we can see that there's a couple of things that we need to do in order to enable this scenario, right? On the one hand, we need to enable a workspace identity, which basically is a managed identity within Azure that represents the workspace you have created and that we created earlier within Fabric, right? Of course, once we have that identity, we also need to make sure that the actual network connectivity is set up, right? So again, from within the workspace in Fabric, we can actually create a managed private endpoint that will show up on the Azure side at the Key Vault. There we need to accept this private endpoint request, and after that, the activation and the approval is done. Actually, the private networking is set up within Fabric to that Azure Key Vault, that is. Of course, we mustn't forget we created that managed identity, the workspace managed identity. Of course, we also need to give it the proper role on the Key Vault in order to be used as well. Once all of that is done, we can go ahead and take a look at the notebook, where we basically, using the MS Spark utils library, we can fetch that secret of our Azure Key Vault that we defined. We can use it to call the API to get that extra information. It's a little bit small here, but don't worry, that's not really the point here. We can use that information that we had in the bronze layer. We can enrich it with the data that we got from the API. And again, we can write it out to our silver layer in our lakehouse. After that, we can create a report. So this one was generated by Copilot, but you usually go ahead and of course gather all the requirements, etc. You can build a report on top of it, which is then connected to the data in that silver layer. And it could be that also we want to segregate access to this report based on specific profiles, right? Imagine there are some people who are in charge of online sales and you don't want to give them access to all sales. In order to do that, we can create a role within the Power BI report. So pretty straightforward. Within Power BI, we can actually create a role. We can scope it, in this case, by store location being equal to online. And then when giving access to the report, we can actually assign, again, security groups to these different roles, right? So we have an all sales role and we have an online sales role. And on the online sales role, we provision a security group in which we put the people from the online sales team in. People from that online sales team, if they open up the reports, they will see, without filtering or whatever, they will just only see the online sales transactions. People with the all sales role, they will be able to see everything from within the report, well, from the data set that the report is connected to. So just to give you a very quick run through of a scenario, of course, every situation is different, and depending on the data sources, what exactly you want to do with it, what workloads within Fabric you want to use, etc., you would need to use one or another security feature within Fabric. So that's it from my end for the quick run through. I think, Christian, you can take over to conclude.
Thank you, Christophe. Yes, so I want to make a quick summary. So, but very simple. So Microsoft Fabric is a very strong evolution of the previous data platform solutions, and basically provides a whole set of workloads and a robust security foundation. But of course, it's a shared responsibility, and customers must still make sure that they configure Fabric security correctly, that they use it correctly, and of course combine also you still need to combine security features. I mean by that you need to get your data from Azure resources that are not in Fabric, like ADLS, possibly data lake storage, Databricks, and you need to combine the securing of these external Azure resources with Fabric, for instance, to have trusted workspace access so that the workspace identity of Fabric goes to fetch these resources. So this is all straightforward, as long as you configure security from day one, and that you work together between security and data engineering, which is pretty much the world we are aiming at, and we're going to now with the complexity coming from data and AI. Data and AI projects are standard projects, but they require a bit more knowledge and a bit more collaboration between different teams in the organization. Very important from the standpoint of security is that Microsoft offers you standard security features. They're good, they're excellent, but you need to look at all the perspectives of security. The simplest example is as what Christophe and myself mentioned a few times already, is if your user accounts are not protected by MFA, well then the chance that they're compromised, and if and when they're compromised, that they provide data leak, for instance, Fabric, the chances increase dramatically. Another example is something we've seen also in assessments, is that to protect the workspace administrator role, using either a dedicated admin account or use PIM to elevate your permissions to workspace admin and do not have standing workspace admin permissions. Need to evaluate the security as a whole from all perspectives using a proven methodology. In our case, we chose to use MCSB. Whatever suits you or whatever you have already in your organization, of course, can fit the bill as well. What can you do after this session? Hopefully we've raised the awareness on your end to hopefully let you think about evaluating your Fabric environment end-to-end, from configuration perspective, from the EAM perspective, from the secrets perspective. And of course, it's a security, so it's a continuous evaluation and not just point in time like an audit. It's a continuous activity. Last but not least, Fabric features and especially security features evolve almost every week. I was sharing with Christophe, we were discussing earlier that in your data pipelines now you could use the workspace identity for more tasks, which was only made public or available 1 or 2 weeks ago. So educate yourself, keep abreast of new features. And of course, it's a team exercise, and collaborate between your data teams and your security teams. As Christophe demonstrated, looking at row-level security, that requires functional and technical knowledge from Fabric. I know it exists, but I wouldn't have a clue to determine how it's best configured. That's the job of Christophe. My job is making sure that, for instance, EAM is correctly configured. So it's a collaboration effort, and also collaboration effort starting from day one. I was looking in the Q&A part, and I didn't see any questions. We still have a few minutes, so if you do not have any questions, maybe I can share some tips before we close the
question.
The question
just came in, Christian.
Perfect. Thank you. That's a commercial question.
Yes.
It's a good commercial question. So there is no commercial in the session. So I will try to answer though. Short answer, yes. Let's say yes. So I would say probably normally it's a yes. It really depends on your environment. If your environment is like let's say, very enterprise already with a large deployment of Fabric, then we either need to constrain the assessment to a certain set of workspaces, or we then need to look at a different pricing model. But like I said, I'm not a commercial, so good question. I will pass it on to my colleagues, but I wanted to have at least a little bit of an answer for you. Thank you for the question. Christophe, did you have any tips? I would say, yeah, beyond the obvious that I mentioned about MFA and protecting your workspace administrator, making sure that you have conditional access policies applied to Fabric. That's, I would say, a quick win as well. That's definitely reduce your attack surface on your Fabric. Is making sure that you have conditional access policies configured for Fabric. Also, one quick tip is enabling auditing in Fabric and at least capturing the logs, maybe not monitoring and raising incidents with them, but at least so that you have forensics and post-mortem available should you run into an incident. Christophe, I don't know if you have any other tips?
Yeah, also like in general, like the typical regular developer security principles, I would say, like no plain text API keys in notebooks, etc., etc. Right? Because sometimes people or data engineers, they aren't necessarily have a software engineering background, right? So make sure to keep your eyes peeled and also spend enough attention to those kind of things, right? I think there's, as said, there's a lot of security features available in Fabric now, which weren't there necessarily 1 year ago. So as Christian said, it's a very fast moving set of security features as well. So also maybe revisit some things that you previously looked at and saw that was not possible like 1 year ago. Maybe they are possible today. So, and again, there will be things possible in the future. As said by Christian, there's almost every week, at least every month, new security features coming out. So keep your eyes peeled on those as well. Voilà.
And of course, to finish and conclude, keep a holistic view on Fabric and your security landscape in general. As just features, they plug some holes, but make sure that all the landscape is covered. I want to thank you everyone for your attendance, and see you next time.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks.
Christophe.
And if there's any questions, please do reach out to us. All right, cool.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.